Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyersportsbetting.com. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Let me just throw a tip to gamblers. I know the Cleveland Cavaliers right now are winning every game in sight, right? And I know a lot of people are looking at that team, the defending champions in the National Basketball Association, and they're thinking that that team can actually compete against the Warriors, or let's say, for argument's sake, the San Antonio Spurs, right? If one of those two teams comes out of the Western Conference. They can't. I don't question that LeBron James is the best player in the NBA. It's just that his team doesn't have the defense to compete with either Golden State or San Antonio. Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you basketball fans on that. So, I'm at one of my favorite watering holes. I'm sitting with some sports fans. I'm on the West Coast. I'm in the Bay Area. So we're about to watch Game 4 of the Golden State Warriors against the Utah Jazz. And an ad comes on. And it's very well done, right? It's an MC. He seems to be standing in some kind of room, and he starts talking. Now, there was a lot of crowd noise in the background, and people I was with were talking. So I missed some of the audio on the ad, but toward the end of the ad, there was Anthony Joshua. The ad was for Under Armour, right? And Joshua, of course, ends the ad with a belt on his shoulder, right? Wearing a belt. And, you know, the ad was framed perfectly. So I was looking at him and I thought, you know what? Wow. So Anthony Joshua now is being advertised in the United States. And one of the guys I was with, and I was with a sports crowd, didn't know who he was, right? So just understand that boxing is trying to break global. The heavyweight champion of the world is the perfect person to do so. Anthony Joshua has big money behind him. Under Armour is a big advertiser. They had to pay a lot of money to be on at the beginning of a Warriors game, right? The Warriors are a big ticket draw here in the Bay Area, right? Just know Anthony Joshua is going global, but there's still work to do, right? Many people, even sports fans, don't know who he is, right? Such is the nature of where we are today. Now, let me make a prediction. It's going to sound crazy. Let's face it, it's not the first time I've sounded crazy here. But enjoy Anthony Joshua having all of these belts while it lasts. Because I'm just telling you, I personally believe Anthony Joshua is about to vacate the WBA title. The mandatory contender for that sanctioning body is Luis Ortiz, an older fighter who's savvy, who can get inside. Joshua just had a tough fight against an older fighter. Ortiz, style-wise, is one of the toughest people Joshua could possibly fight. Now understand, there's an immediate rematch clause that he has with Vladimir Klitschko. That first Klitschko fight is already a classic. That was box office gold. That delivered on a host of levels. It was a great fight for fans. It was a great fight for the sport. Helped expand the sports profile. It was also a financial bonanza. And it was a legacy fight. The kind of fight that actually raised both men. Right? We now have seen Anthony Joshua in against a legitimate, long-time heavyweight champion. Right? Former champion. And Vladimir Klitschko, after a more than 1 year layoff, looked a lot better than he did against Tyson Fury. So if Vladimir Klitschko wants the immediate rematch, Anthony Joshua is going to vacate the WBA title. He's going to go with the bigger event, and he'll have political cover. In other words, people aren't going to say, hey, you're dodging Luis Ortiz because you're taking the Vladimir Klitschko rematch. Right? People understand Vladimir Klitschko, Anthony Joshua have a history. But in my opinion, even if Klitschko decides not to exercise the rematch clause, Anthony Joshua has other belts. Right? Why is he going to risk his title when he's just getting started against perhaps the toughest guy out there style-wise for him? Right? Luis Ortiz has an inside game that I just haven't seen from Anthony Joshua. Yes, I know. Joshua decked Dylan White up close, shots to the body and stuff like that. But Ortiz is a different level inside. Right? Different level entirely. And Ortiz, of course, has had the opportunity to look at Joshua against Klitschko. Right? He got a chance to look at Joshua over 11 rounds. He got a chance to look at Joshua's stamina issue, which surfaced in the Klitschko fight, as well as Joshua's ability or perhaps inability to take big shots up top. So, prediction, I believe the heavyweight title is going to be splintered. Right? A lot of fans might not notice it, but I'm not expecting Anthony Joshua to fight Luis Ortiz this year. I know Joshua has said, line him up. Right? Joshua wants to mow down the heavyweight division. Okay, good for him in the court of public opinion. I don't believe he's going to follow through and actually fight Luis Ortiz, at least not now. I believe the people behind him saw him against Klitschko and understood that he's still a work in progress. Right? That they have to take this thing in steps. And let's face it too, it doesn't hurt him too badly avoiding Luis Ortiz right now. Because sooner or later those guys are gonna fight if both of them continue winning. Now let me just make a point here that might not seem obvious. Let's talk Mike Tyson for a second. And I know many people consider Joshua, who has a 100% KO ratio, to be this generation's Mike Tyson. And I know Tyson himself has praised Joshua after his win over Klitschko. Okay, great. But just understand, I know there are many of you who remember the Mike Tyson era, who lived through it. Right? This isn't something in a history book or an old sports magazine. You actually remember watching the fights. Now you might recall Tyson, right, came along, was just smaller and quicker, moved better than the bigger heavyweights of that time. Right? The Tony Tuckers, the Larry Holmeses, the Razor Ruddicks. Right? Tyson was a smaller guy who moved better. Right? Tyson, in terms of his movement on his front foot, Tyson was cat quick. He could just jump inside, get inside. Frank Bruno fight. Right? Then along came some big heavyweights. These things move in cycles. You might remember Lennox Lewis. You might remember a guy who, in my opinion, had more upside than Lennox Lewis, but wasn't able to realize it. Riddick Bowe. Right? These were bigger men than Mike Tyson. Right? Bigger. Now, Lennox Lewis rules the roost. I know Evander Holyfield comes in, fights Tyson, fights Lennox Lewis. Okay, great. But Lennox Lewis rules the roost for several years. Then passes the torch off, right? Walks away, having beaten Vitaly Klitschko, who then himself gets a title, right? Big men have ruled the roost for a while now. But just understand, just like the great Joe Louis, big man, lost to Ezzard Charles, important fight in boxing, right? Big men from time immemorial have only held the title for so long. The title actually fluctuates between big heavyweights, where everyone's big and clunky, and smaller, nimble men, right? So then you have moments where a smaller, more nimble guy, Joe Frazier, runs into Big George Foreman, right? Then, of course, you have moments where a Mike Tyson takes out a Razor Ruddock, right? Or takes out a Trevor Burbank and becomes champ. So, let me say this. What I want people to do is to consider the idea that Anthony Joshua isn't Tyson. Anthony Joshua is the kind of fighter who Mike Tyson would replace. In other words, this is a big heavyweight era. You got big guys who are flat-footed, who are living off power. Right? Deontay Wilder, Vladimir Klitschko, Anthony Joshua. Right? These are big men. Right? Big men. I know I sound crazy here, but I want people to just consider the idea that cruiserweight champion, and I've mentioned this in other videos, Oxlander Usyk, might actually be a real threat to win the heavyweight title, right? I know he's big for a cruiserweight, but understand he's been in with cruiserweights and moves a lot better than these heavyweights. I also want people to consider, and here's a name to throw out there, and I know it's going to sound crazy, but I want you to look up Maris Briedis. Right? This is a guy who moves extremely well. He's fought against heavyweights. Right? He's fought against heavyweights. And he's done well. I believe these guys, because of Joshua's clunkiness in terms of moving around the ring. In other words, Joshua's athletic, but he doesn't move well. Vladimir Klitschko had much more foot speed than Joshua. Understand, Joshua would be at risk against faster moving guys who can box. Now in the heavyweight division, and I know I got a lot of heat for this in the video I made yesterday, there is a big man who moves like a little man. Joseph Parker. Right? In my opinion, because of Parker's athleticism, he's more dangerous than public opinion believes. Right? This is a guy who, quite frankly, against some of these guys, is going to make them look stationary. Right? Wasn't that the dynamic when Ali came along and beat guys like Sonny Liston? Right? If you're the guy in the division who can move and who can operate, right, that foot speed advantage is going to give you a real big endowment. So I know many of you are saying, look, man, the guy didn't look that good in his last fight. His opponent said he can't punch, right? Understand, opponents say you can't punch so often, right, that this past weekend we had multiple fights. Didn't Chavez Jr. claim Canelo couldn't punch? Guys, that's just sour grapes. Trust me, I know Joseph Parker can punch. I know Joseph Parker has more athleticism than Anthony Joshua. Right? So if you're looking at the heavyweight division and you're handicapping these things, and you're wondering, hey, what could possibly go wrong in an era where people like Shannon Briggs are fighting for titles? right? He's fighting Fres Oquendo. Where, you know, Deontay Wilder's unbeaten, Anthony Joshua's unbeaten. Those guys eventually are going to get in the ring, and I think we all understand that heavy, heavy punches are going to be thrown. Well, just understand that there is a place in the heavyweight division, and it's structural, for the Ezzard Charleses, right? The Mike Tysons, the Joe Frazers. I'll leave Rocky Marciano out of the conversation simply because Marciano didn't really move that well in the ring. As they said back in the day, he had 2 left feet, right? But a guy who can move is going to give Anthony Joshua a lot of problems. Finally, let me close by saying this. I read the comments to these videos, and I always hear that I hate Canelo, right? Even after I picked him to beat Chavez Jr., right? I hate Canelo. Then I hear I hate Anthony Joshua now, right? Before I was hearing I hate David Haye and stuff like that. Folks, in gambling, there's no love or hatred for any individual athlete, right? I have no incentive to have some hatred for any boxer out there. I'm just trying to figure out a way to beat the casino. So, in looking at boxers, yeah, we are going to have to point out things like a lot of Canelo's great punches are local. He has ring coverage on the right hand, but, right, not as much ring coverage as Golovkin. I am going to point out that Anthony Joshua was bone tired in the 6th round against Klitschko and needed a second wind. Right, that Anthony Joshua hasn't had a lot of fights where he got hit like he got hit in the Klitschko fight, and against Klitschko he was on the canvas. That Anthony Joshua in his 20s didn't have the foot speed of Vladimir Klitschko in his 40s. Right? We are going to analyze fights, and some of the things we say are going to be critical. This is not a fan club site. I know people keep writing me saying, when are you going to praise Anthony Joshua and stuff like that? Look, you need to find the site where Joshua's family talks about him. When I'm talking about Anthony Joshua, I'm really just focused on, what parts of his game will allow me to profit betting on his fights. And understand, I'll gladly bet on Anthony Joshua if I feel it'll put money in my pocket. Right? Gladly. I believe the hedge I recommended. I took Klitschko against Joshua, but I believe the hedge I recommended was Joshua by KO. Right? That delivered. I'm happy. But what I'm not going to do here is just try to be some promotional wing for a fighter's promotional team. Right? Also, there are fighters who I think are great for the sport. I think Andre Ward is spectacular for the sport. Right? He's a role model. I can tell you, Ward's a great guy in and out of the ring. Right? From a community perspective, he's a great guy. But that's not going to stop me from believing that he loses the rematch against Sergei Kovalev, who might not be that great a guy. But keep in mind, I'm not here handing out medals for being a great guy or a role model. I'm actually here trying to discuss boxing. So keep that in mind as you watch these videos, right? To the crowd that says, hey, when are you going to praise Anthony Joshua? Hey, look, I thought I was praising the guy, right? I'm trying to make sure that people globally, anyone who accesses the internet, people like the folks I was with at the bar yesterday, know who the heavyweight champion of the world is, right? But at the same time, hey, if the guy was on the canvas in the 6th round, I'm going to point that out. Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. Expect Joshua to vacate the WBA title. That's not set out of any hatred for Anthony Joshua. That's set out of a realization that Luis Ortiz at this stage of Joshua's career is simply too dangerous. Right? You're kidding yourself if you think it's a foregone conclusion that Joshua would win a rematch against Vladimir Klitschko. Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comments section to this video. Thanks for stopping by.